Texas Constitution, it says Texas is a free and independent state.
The governor holds the state's highest office.
All political power is inherent in the people.
And it's up to Texans.
The faith of the people of Texas stands pledged.
From the Rio Grande to the Red River, the Panhandle to the Gulf.
When you can't find a way, you go out and make a way. Make it happen.
They'll decide in November who leads the Lone Star State over the next 4 years.
To make sure that Texas will remain the premier state in the greatest country in the history of the world.
Tonight, 2 candidates debate the issues, setting the course for Texas on immigration, taxes, and how we help those in need.
Listen closely tonight. See if you like what you're hearing from your candidate. Or are you willing to change your mind and your vote like an independent Texan can?
Good evening. We are coming to you live from the LBJ Presidential Library on the campus of the University of Texas at Austin for the only Texas gubernatorial debate this election season. Hello, I am Robert Hadlock. I'm the anchor at KXAN News here in Austin. I'll be your host this evening for this Next Star Media Group special presentation. Let's first introduce you to our candidates who are here this evening. We begin with incumbent Governor Greg Abbott, who is seeking re-election, and his challenger, former Dallas County Sheriff Lupe Valdez. Before we get started, we first want to let you know that this debate will be seen on air and online in every Next Star Media Group market, covering the great state of Texas, from El Paso all the way to Texarkana. And we also have broadcast partners tonight airing this debate in Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, and Houston. Let's introduce you to some of the partners that are here with us tonight. Here are the panelists for the debate. We have Steve Spriester. He's an anchor at KSAT in San Antonio. Norma Garcia is anchor representing Telemundo stations in Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, and Houston. Julie Fine is a political reporter at NBC5 in Dallas, Fort Worth. And Andy Sirota, anchor and political reporter at KPRC in Houston. Here is a quick rundown of the rules we have this evening. Each candidate will get 60 seconds to answer the main questions, 30 seconds for rebuttal, and if needed, 30 seconds for any follow-ups. The sound of a bell will ring when their time is up. There are no opening statements, and candidates will get 1 minute for closing remarks. All questions will be asked and answered in English. We are also presenting an interactive experience for our viewers tonight. Follow the hashtag TXGovDebate. We have links to the results of a live focus group of undecided voters who will be grading the candidates and much more. We want to go to Steve Spriester to begin things off tonight.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, candidates, for being here this evening. Our first question: in the aftermath of mass shootings in Parkland, Florida, then hitting Texas at the First Baptist Church of Sutherland Springs and the Santa Fe High School, I've talked to many students who say they simply don't feel safe at school.
You see it happen so often now. It could be a few weeks or a few months split apart. And now it's kind of that thing where you expected. It's like you're expecting to wake up to find out that another student has lost their life today.
In the wake of shootings in Texas and in Florida, Colorado, and Connecticut, we have heard politicians talk, but it seems few changes have been made. Before we get into details on how each of you would deal with this issue, I want to ask a question about arming teachers, and this is a simple show of hands. We're going to allow you to answer this question more thoroughly, but by a show of hands, raise your hand if you are for arming teachers in Texas schools. Thank you. Governor Abbott, you raised your hand. Explain why you are in favor of arming Texas teachers.
Happy to, Steve. But first, if you don't mind, let me thank Nexstar for broadcasting this debate across the entire state of Texas. I want to say thank you to the University of Texas LBJ School for hosting this, and also want to thank Sheriff Valdez for participating in this. Listen, the reason why I support arming teachers is because it was one of the proposals that came out of the 3 days of roundtables that I conducted. Remember this, in the immediate aftermath of the shooting that took place in Santa Fe, I went to the school in Santa Fe. I hugged those kids. I talked to the parents and the teachers. And then we had these roundtables to talk about very meaningful solutions, saying that never again should we allow this to happen because schools are a place to learn, not a place for fear. And so in the aftermath of the 3 days of roundtables, we had multiple solutions, one of which was to give the choice to schools to arm people on the school, not necessarily teachers, but it could be a coach, it could be an administrator, it could be a staff member, does not have to be a teacher, which is very, very important. It's not the state mandating that teachers be armed, but allowing schools at their choice.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you. Sheriff Valdez, you did not raise your hand on this issue. Why are you not in favor of arming Texas teachers?
You know, every parent should have the right, and child should have the right to go to school and learn and come home safely. Teachers are understaffed, underpaid, under-resourced, and yet they continually do service to our community. Now, I've forgotten the first thing that I should have done is thank you all. And I will go back and thank you all because it's important to thank the hosts, the people watching, the people behind the scenes, the library, and of course the governor. But I will continue to say teachers should be teaching, not being armed and being the defense. I do believe that there should be some defense there, but teachers are not the ones. If they wanted to be armed, they should have gone to the military. But teaching, we continually fortify our schools, but we won't invest in education. We want to arm our teachers, but we won't pay them as the professionals that they are. I believe they should be there to teach and take care of the children as they're doing now.
All right. Thank you, Sheriff. Governor, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal if you choose to take it.
I want to elaborate more on the conclusions that came out of the roundtables that I hosted, because there were more strategies other than just allowing officials at school to be armed. The main thing that came out was, for one, we have to enforce current law. Number two, the state must provide better mental health resources for students at school, for people in our state. And then the last thing is we got to make sure that we provide alternatives in our school for them to be more secure. Some schools want to have metal detectors, other schools want to have other strategies. We need to give schools the strategies they choose to make sure their students are safe.
Sheriff Valdez, you have 30 seconds.
Yeah, and I agree with him. We do need to spend more on mental health resources. But I did talk to the students also. As a matter of fact, there's some of them downstairs right now. And they said nothing about arming teachers. They're more concerned about the adults listening to them. They're literally marching in the street, asking the adults to make decent decisions. We are the adults. They shouldn't be begging us to do the right thing. We need to take the step and do the right thing.
Thank you, Sheriff. Governor Abbott, a follow-up question. You directed the legislature to look at expanding the red flag laws for mental health issues or suspicion of mental health issues. If this expanded red flag bill comes to your desk, will you sign it? You have 30 seconds.
Well, listen, concerns have been raised about red flag laws, about it taking or compromising Second Amendment rights without due process. And that obviously would be a serious legal problem. And so if that were the way that the law looked, that's something that I could not support. What I do support, Steve, however, are the strategies that came out of the roundtables. Very importantly, you don't want to come up with these things off the cuff. Having met with dozens of experts around the state, they emphasize the importance of investing in mental health, providing greater law enforcement presence at schools, as well as enforcing current laws.
You would not support a red flag law?
I would not support a red flag law that would take guns away from people without due process.
Thank you. Sheriff, you have said in the past that you would be in favor of expanding red flag laws.
Yes.
Will you expand on that a little bit? I mean, a lot of people would have issue with the fact that a Texan is punished before a crime is even committed.
They're not punished. There is due process. Red flag laws were meant to stop people from doing harm to themselves and others. I believe that if you're saying we're not going to do the red flag laws, then we're okay with people doing harm to themselves and others. This is not about continual gun violence. This is about stopping gun violence. I think the governor has confusion between gun ownership and gun violence. There is a difference with people who own guns and act appropriately and people who don't.
Thank you, Sheriff. Norma Garcia has our next question.
Thank you, Steve. Since 2001, the Texas DREAM Act has allowed college students in Texas to receive in-state tuition and grants regardless of immigration status. For the last 2 sessions, there has been an effort to repeal this law, but so far it has failed. Sheriff Valdez, all this is happening while the cost of college continues to rise. As governor, how will you afford to keep this going for students who are not U.S. citizens? Sheriff Valdez, you have 60 seconds to answer the question.
We're always going to go on the choice that makes people better. The Dreamers have been here, they were raised here, they go to school here, they have jobs here, there are teachers, our doctors, our plumbers, and this is the only country that they know. I believe in a path for citizenship for the Dreamers. Therefore, we need to prepare them to be here and be educated. Public education is an equalizer. All the way up to college, it's an equalizer. And we need to be able to give them the opportunities that they need so they can go on being an asset to the community. They are currently employers, and they continue to benefit the community, and we need to make sure that they get the best that they can in order to be productive in the community.
Governor, in 2014, you told the Texas Tribune that you would not veto a repeal of the Texas DREAM Act. Is that still the case? Why or why not?
Norma, let me explain, and that is the legislators who passed that DREAM Act, they had a noble cause behind what they were seeking to do, but there was a flaw in the structure in the law that passed. The law that passed said that these students who received in-state tuition had to demonstrate that they were on a pathway toward achieving legal status. However, there is no apparatus in the law to make sure that that, in fact, is being done. Hence, the law is structured, is flawed, and it has to be fixed.
And you would
So
repeal
we're
it?
blaming the students for a broken immigration system? That's what we're doing. We're blaming the students because they can't go through a decent immigration system, so we continue to blame them.
Governor, would you like to respond? You have 30 seconds.
The important thing that we do in the state of Texas is our job first is to make sure we educate Texas students. That's the purpose of the Texas university system. In addition to Texas students, Texas universities have the option of allowing students to attend who may be from outside of the state of Texas. And there are certain laws, rules, and regulations, whether you're from Oklahoma or Mexico or New Zealand. And those laws have to be respected.
But they live here.
One thing about the United States of America.
They live here,
This country
Governor.
has been based upon the rule of law.
That is-
Violations of the rule of law trample the
That
very
is
principle
all
the
the
United
time
States
that we
was
have for
created
this
upon.
question, Governor. The next question comes from Julie Fine.
Thank you, Norma. Many Texans pay property taxes, and a lot of that money that goes straight to school funding. A decade ago, state school funding was split nearly equally between the state funds and property taxpayers. Now, local property taxpayers are picking up nearly 10% more. Governor Abbott, what is one thing that you will do to specifically lower the property tax burden?
You know, I've talked to Texans across the state of Texas over the past year, and they're absolutely fed up with skyrocketing property taxes, and they agree that no government should have the ability to tax you out of your home. We got to remember this, Julie, and that is that people who own homes, they're not renters of the property from the city they're paying taxes to, and so we need to reform this in a way that will allow voter approval before taxes are increased. So my property tax plan, which you can find by going to gregabbott.com, is very clear. It limits government's ability to raise your taxes. And also, and it gives you, the homeowner, the authority to fire your tax appraiser by adding an election process for tax appraisers.
Sheriff Valdez, you have 60 seconds. What is something that you would do to lower the property tax burden?
First of all, we cannot talk about property taxes without talking about education, public education. The governor says he doesn't want taxes raised, but he keeps putting less and less money into education. 10 years ago, it was over 40% or 45%. Now it's almost down to 30-something. And in this year, they're seeking to cost $3 billion more. I think it's funny how he says they can't raise taxes, but they pat themselves on the back and wink because they're pushing the burden down to the local communities. Every time they put less funds into education, the local community has to take up the slack. So therefore, they have to raise property taxes, homeowner taxes. It doesn't make sense to me that you keep pushing the burden down, but yet you won't allow them to do anything. The state needs to pay its fair share.
Governor Abbott, you have 30 seconds.
Cities and counties don't provide education, but they do raise your property taxes. They have the ability to raise your property taxes by 8% a year. You, the people at home, do you have the ability to give yourself an 8% raise every year? I don't think so. That's what cities and counties do. I want to limit the ability of cities and counties from being able to increase property taxes above 2.5% per year.
The two most expensive things for property taxes are public education and health care. If you keep putting less money into this, they have to do something. They don't want to ignore their folks. They have to do something. So you're pushing the load on them and therefore bringing up the property taxes. The state needs to pay its fair share and quit dumping on the local community.
Quick follow-up here. You both talk about what you'd like to do to lower the burden. However, how do you get the legislature on board? Last session, they could not agree on a property tax cap.
One thing that I know I've experienced, that I know every legislator running for office this cycle has experienced, and that is they get complaints from homeowners across the state, and they're going to be coming back into a session knowing they have to do something about property taxes. The good thing about my property tax reform is that it reduces the Robin Hood reallocation of money, which goes directly to helping our schools.
Sheriff, you have 15 seconds as well.
It's still the same thing. You can't say it's their fault when you keep putting the load on them. We continually cut education funds, and yet they have to do something to keep educating the families there.
If I could add, one thing that's clear,
you both
I'm
have
the
10
only
seconds,
candidate
both
on
of you.
stage tonight that's articulated a plan to cut your property taxes.
Sheriff, you have 10 seconds to
I'm
respond.
the only candidate on the stage who knows that that's not correct. You need to make sure to have the state pay its fair share.
Next question, Andy Sirota.
Julie, thank you. We asked viewers and voters to send us their questions for the candidates. This one is via Twitter. It's from Edith DS. She's asking, what can we do to better prepare for disasters like Hurricane Harvey? We were wondering that same thing. A year has passed since Harvey, yet many people from Beaumont to Rockport filed for assistance with FEMA, but there are families all across Southeast Texas right now who are still struggling to rebuild. According to recently released research, 1 in 5 residents in the 24-county area experienced severe damage to their home, and 8% remain displaced from their pre-Harvey home. When the Texas legislature convenes in January, as governor, will you tap the state's $11.9 billion rainy day fund? This is the largest rainy day fund in the country. Would you tap that in order to help Texans who are still struggling from the effects of Harvey? Sheriff Valdez, let's start with you. You have 60 seconds.
Hasta la pregunta es necia. Even the question is ridiculous. First of all, my condolences go out to the families who are still struggling and suffering. When I visited Beaumont, Rockport, Houston, and all those areas, the families were still struggling to put their life together. A police officer or law enforcement, anytime there's a cry for help, they rush to the scene and do something about it. When the leaders of all of these areas call the governor and ask for help, his immediate response was, stop complaining, fill out the forms. And yet, we have a rainy day fund. He calls a special session for bathrooms, but does not call a special session when people are dying. The rainy day fund is the biggest savings account in the United States. Governor, it rained.
Sheriff Valdez, thank you. Governor, you have 60 seconds to answer the question.
I've made almost 70 trips to hug and to help Texans who were affected by Hurricane Harvey. Understand this, when a disaster is declared, the governor has the authority to spend state money without having to call a special session to tap the rainy day fund. For example, we have and we are providing hundreds upon hundreds of millions of dollars to cities, counties, and schools, all of which will be repaid from the rainy day fund in the next session. But on top of that, the governor has the responsibility to negotiate with the federal government for federal disaster aid. I negotiated $30 billion to help rebuild Texas. That is more disaster aid fund than the state has received in response to a disaster in the history of the state of Texas. We have been able to amass the resources to ensure that we're going to be able to not just rebuild, but to rebuild Texas better than before Hurricane Harvey struck.
So you're saying you will not tap the rainy day fund?
To the contrary,
next legislative session?
No, to the contrary, to be clear what I just said, we've already spent money from the state budget that will be required to be drawn down from the rainy day fund. In a time of disaster, the governor has the authority to advance spend that money. So money has already been spent that will be required to be repaid from the rainy day fund. Point one, but point two is that we will be considering the multitude of other expenses that cities, counties, and schools have been dealing with to make sure they have the resources they need.
Governor Abbott, thank you so much. Sheriff Valdez, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
It took forever for him to answer the call. Texans themselves went from all parts of Texas to try and help before he actually did something. As I said, law enforcement rushes to the scene when something is going wrong. We need a governor that's going to do the same thing, not just tell people to fill the paperwork.
Governor Abbott, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
People watching on TV will remember this time a year ago. On a daily basis, I was on TV screens talking to you from the scene of what was going on. People will remember in Houston this month, September of last year, I was there giving Houston and Harris County in excess of $100 million at that time to help them with their needs. I provided checks to every jurisdiction that was affected to make sure that they were going to be having every dime they needed for debris removal.
That's all the time we have for this question. Thank you. Steve Spriester has our next question.
Thank you, Andy. For this next question, we're going to start with Governor Abbott. Earlier this year, House Speaker Joe Straus called for the State Preservation Board to take down this small plaque inside the Capitol building. It's been sitting in the Capitol since 1959. It honors soldiers who fought for the Confederacy. This plaque says the Civil War was not a rebellion and the underlying cause was not slavery. Nearly every historian in the country says that is wrong. As governor, you're chair of the State Preservation Board. If reelected, will you order the removal of this plaque? Why or why not?
This plaque was put up at a vote by the Texas legislature. It's the Texas legislature with the responsibility to take it down. Should they take it down because of the factual inaccuracy? Absolutely. And I'll be working with the legislature on that issue this next session. But because the legislature was the body that put it up, it's the legislature's responsibility to take it down. I don't think a governor should unilaterally have the authority to be dismissive of an act of the legislature. If you can do that with one issue, you can do that with virtually any issue, and I think that raises questions.
Sheriff Valdez, if you were elected governor, will you take down this plaque?
You know, I come from a family that was needlessly abused by law enforcement. So I understand that oftentimes when someone has been hurt, there's distress and tension. First, do no harm. That's the first thing we have to look at. First, do no harm. Then, change the circumstances. And lastly, change the outcome. If that plaque is doing harm to someone, then we should come to the table and do something about it. Whether it's the legislator or somebody who puts up stuff in the buildings or whatever, we just need to take care of it and get it done.
So you would take down that plaque?
Yes.
Governor, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Again, I look forward to working with the legislature to address a plaque that's in the Capitol that has factually flawed information on it.
But you will push legislators to do that?
Yes.
Thank you. Sheriff Valdez, you have 30 seconds.
He promised a lot of the same things 4 years ago. If you'll look at some of the issues, these are some of the same issues that were coming up 4 years ago. Every 4 years, he agrees to do certain things, including giving teachers a raise, and it doesn't happen. We need to get things done and somebody to get in there and do them.
Thank you, Sheriff. Norma Garcia with our next question.
Thank you, Steve. Sheriff, we will start with you on this question, and this deals with border security. Soldiers, members of the military, have been sent to the border for more than 100 years. The current deployment of the National Guard is nothing new. Right now, there are about 250 Texas guardsmen along the border. Their stated duty is only to observe and report illegal activity. Do you think this is good use of our resources? And why should Texans pay for these deployments rather than solely the federal government? Sheriff Valdez, you have 60 seconds.
First of all, currently we have some of the safest cities along the border. El Paso, McAllen, Brownsville have all been seen as some of the safest cities on the border. Yet we take $800 million and put troops on the border. We militarize the area. I would just hope that if he continues to do this, he gets the money from the federal government. This is a federal government issue. If we're talking about a crisis, then we should take that money and put it into a genuine Texas crisis. Public education, healthcare is things that will touch both parties, rural and urban areas, and all around. We need to put our money in Texas. Texas needs to use their money for things that will improve Texas, not things that the national government is supposed to be taking care of.
Governor, 60 seconds.
First, with my work with the federal government is paying for the tab for the National Guard on the border. Second, the reason why I'm working to make sure that we do secure the border is because I want to go after the human traffickers, the sex traffickers, the cartel members, those who threaten us like gang members, the rise of MS-13 gang members in the state of Texas. I want to do something to put a stop to that. Let me tell you a story about a teenage girl I met in McAllen when I first ran for governor. She was talking about her brother who was playing a pickup game of soccer in McAllen, and that he had to choose whether or not a son of a cartel member was going to be on his team or not on his team. What were going to be the consequences if he chose that player? What would be the consequences if he didn't? I promised that girl I would make sure as governor I would not force her brother to have to make that decision again in the future.
Sheriff Valdez, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
We can have plenty of stories of hardship, and there's plenty of stories of hardship of people coming across. The ones that he named that he wanted to stop are being stopped. As a matter of fact, every day there's a group that are not allowed to come through because they have some signs of maybe criminal activity. What we're putting the military up against is people who are escaping torture, who are trying to find a better life, and yet we put the military up. Are the gunboats going to start shooting the families that are coming across?
Thank you, Sheriff. Governor, you have 30 seconds.
It's not being done. That's why I was in McAllen 2 weeks ago announcing the opening of a new Texas anti-gang center in McAllen where the federal, state, and local officials work collaboratively together to go after these gangs. That's on top of ones that we've opened in Houston and around the state, and I announced a proposal to open 2 more anti-gang centers, one in Tyler, one in Waco, because gang activity, including MS-13 activity, is spreading across the state, and I'm the only person running for governor who will do anything about it.
And if they are coming across the state, it's because you've been in office for the last 4 years. They're coming across now because you let them in.
That is all the time we have for that question. Thank you. Julie, you're next.
You can build roads through tolls and taxes, and we need new roads to handle all of the new people coming to Texas. Governor, this question is to you first. Almost a year ago, you told TxDOT to remove all toll roads from their future planning. With the state growing the way it is, how do you propose paying for roads without tolls?
I'm very proud, Julie, of what we've done during my tenure in office, because I made a commitment to voters 4 years ago that we would build roads without raising taxes, fees, tolls, or debt. And what we've done is, through special allocations that we made, we have been able to dedicate $7.5 billion a year for 10 years. That's $75 billion to build roads in this state without raising taxes, fees, tolls, or debt. Texas now has the largest road building fund that's ever existed that I know of by any state in the United States of America without having to use taxes, fees, tolls, or debts to build roads. There are so many roads being built. If you drove down here from Dallas for this, you passed dozens of construction projects on I-35. The best business to be in today is the orange cone business, because we have so many roads being built across the state of Texas.
Sheriff Valdez, you've said you're not in favor of toll roads. How do you plan on paying for needed roads in Texas?
As he mentioned, we need to use the taxes that we're collecting right now for those purposes. We need to use the gasoline tax, the license tax, all of these that we had agreed to use for roads and other things. Yet that's not what they're being used for. We need to have our priorities and actually use the money that we've collected for the reason that we said we're going to collect it. And we need to use that for better highways instead of toll roads.
Governor, you have 30 seconds.
Well, we actually are aggregating all of those taxes, and we directed from the oil and gas severance tax and from sales tax. We dedicated revenue to make sure that this wouldn't be a 2-year deal, but to make sure it would be a decade-long deal, if not longer, to make sure that we're going to be building roads that accommodate growth. Julie, I got to tell you this. I talk to CEOs across the country that are moving their companies here from other states. They tell me one reason why they're moving to Texas, Texas has such a superior transportation infrastructure.
Governor, thank you. Sheriff, you have 30 seconds.
But they also need schools. And I have to go back to the fact that the state needs to pay its fair share for public education. All those people who come here, the job's main interest is employees, and they want a healthy and educated workforce. We need to start putting our funds into the future of Texas and putting more funds into public education and health care.
We're going to stop you both there, and we're moving on to the next question with Andy Sirota.
Julie, thank you. While the images of flooding are what most will remember for years to come, Hurricane Harvey's winds also tore through many coastal communities. That's where the Texas Windstorm Insurance Association, or TWIA, is supposed to step in. For hundreds of thousands of property owners in Texas, TWIA is their only option for windstorm insurance. So for nearly a year now, the KPRC Channel 2 investigative team has been examining TWIA's post-Harvey performance. One common storyline: Harvey victims say they're being shortchanged on their claims or not being paid at all.
I have been given $65,000 now, but I'm at a halfway point.
Since the governor appoints the insurance commissioner in Texas and that person appoints TWIA's board of directors, what will you do to make sure that homeowners are fairly compensated? And would you insist the state attorney general investigate TWIA? Sheriff Valdez, you have 60 seconds. Let's start with you.
Well, first of all, we need to seriously take care of the insurance problem. A week before Harvey, our governor signed a law to give insurance more time to discuss whether they would pay or not. And then when Harvey happened, he wouldn't delay the enforcement of that law. And all these people were crying to the insurance, were calling out to the insurance to do something about it. We need to stop the pay-to-play appointments. And we all know about the whisper campaign of pay-to-play. We need to appoint people who will actually have the people's and the business aspect in mind, not just one side. We need to stop appointing people that donate to us, that take care of us and our friends and family. We need to appoint people to these boards that actually work in that area.
So would you insist that the state attorney general investigate TWIA based on what you just told us?
I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure that Texans get the better deal.
Governor Abbott, you have 60 seconds to answer the question.
One, I as governor expect TWIA to fully pay every Valley claim, period. Two, if there's any delay in the payment of a claim, yes, I would expect the Attorney General to investigate. Three, I talked to the insurance commissioner about 6 months ago to make sure that TWIA claims were being paid quick enough. He showed me records at that time that as of that time, more than 95% of TWIA claims have been resolved. But let me make one last point, and that is there's an issue right now about TWIA insurance rates going up. I am against the increase of TWIA insurance rates. I've talked to people like the mayor of Fulton, Jimmy Kendrick, small business owners up and down the coastal bend. They cannot afford an increase in the TWIA insurance rate, and as governor, I'm working to make sure the TWIA insurance will not be increased.
Governor Abbott, thank you. Sheriff Valdez, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
It still comes down to the same thing. 4 years ago, he'd made more or less the same promises, and we still haven't seen it done. You need to appoint people to boards that know what the business is, not just the people that are donating to you. We need to make sure that Texas is taken care of first before we take care of the others.
Governor Abbott, 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
This is a classic example of what I look for in appointments. The person that I appointed to be in charge of the Insurance Commission is a lawyer who formerly specialized in insurance law, is a former state judge. And so this is a man who knows the subject area extremely well and is very competent. When I make appointments, I look for the best qualified person, someone who brings experience to the table, who will achieve the mission of making Texas better, period.
So you're saying that if they donate to you, it doesn't matter?
I could care less if anyone donates to me. My job is to make sure the state of Texas is run well.
Thank you
and I'm
both.
going to make sure I do that.
Thank you so much. We're hoping you're enjoying tonight's debate wherever you're watching in the entire state of Texas. And a reminder, you can follow hashtag TXGovDebate on Twitter. You'll find links to a live focus group we're conducting right now. They're grading the candidates' performances. You'll also find supplemental information for all of our questions that we're asking here tonight. And now back to Steve Streeser, who will be asking the first of our individual questions of each candidate. Steve?
Thank you, Robert. Governor Abbott, you called a special session in 2017. One of the items on the agenda was the legislation regarding bathroom privacy, which requires public school students to use the bathrooms based on their birth sex. There have been a number of issues raised with the measure, from business leaders worried about boycotts in the Texas economy to Joe Strauss, the Speaker of the House, worried about personal costs of this bill, saying, quote, "I don't want the suicide of a single Texan on my hands," end quote. Tonight, are you willing to say that if a bathroom bill lands on your desk next legislative session, that you will or won't sign it?
Here's what I want to be very clear about, because over the course of the past year, I've charted an agenda that will completely transform the state of Texas. And let me tell you the items that are on that agenda. It is to cut property taxes in Texas. It is to create more jobs. It is to cut regulations. It is to make our communities safer by arresting these very dangerous gang members. It is by making our schools safer, by getting rid of gun violence in schools. It is by ensuring that we make our state better, by helping our veterans who fought for our freedom, by giving them the economic opportunity they need and the health care they deserve, as well as making sure the state of Texas does everything we can to take care of the victims of Hurricane Harvey. That is going to be my agenda this coming session, period.
The bathroom bill, if it comes to your desk, is not one of those priorities that I heard you mention.
It's not on my agenda.
Will you sign it if it comes to your desk?
Well, I don't sign hypothetical bills. All I can tell you is what my agenda is, which I did, and what I'm going to be focused on during the session.
Thank you, Governor. Sheriff Valdez, you have 30 seconds in rebuttal.
You know, he listed gang members and several other things, and I'm almost wondering, does that mean that transgenders are gang members? Because that's what he was going after. There is a continual fear-mongering, and I don't believe in laws that start out with fear. We need to stop the fear-mongering in our laws and get down to what really matters to all Texans, to have an equality life, to have an equal and fair and opportunity in this state, instead of just dealing with people that you don't agree with.
Thank you, Sheriff. Governor Abbott, you have 30 seconds.
One thing I know from talking to Texans all the way from Amarillo down to Brownsville, from Texarkana out to El Paso, all Texans want to make sure that they and their families are safe. One reason why I talk about safety tonight is because I talk about safety every day. That's the reason why law enforcement officials across the state of Texas have endorsed me, because the law enforcement officials know I am the governor who will work with law enforcement to keep Texans safe.
Okay, I got to answer that one.
I'll give you 15 seconds. We have a lot of questions we want to get to still.
You know, they did endorse him. When I took over the sheriff's department, I made a lot of changes. I took on the good old boys and I made a lot of changes. And not everybody was happy. And yes, they have a habit of endorsing the incumbent. But the governor holds the purse, and he holds it with a vengeance. I personally know about that. So why wouldn't they endorse him?
All right, thank you. Julie Fine with our next question.
Sheriff Valdez, you've now paid your property taxes, but up until just a few months ago, you owed $12,000 in back taxes on 7 different properties that you own. Should Texans be concerned about you managing state finances?
Not at all. I did what the average Texan does. Never was delinquent, but I made it in payments. I made decisions, as all Texans have to do. Do I pay this bill, that bill, or do I just extend the payments? That's exactly what I did. I extended the payments, which is what a lot of Texans would do. Never became delinquent. Let's get that very clear. Never became delinquent, but I also chose to not raise the rent of my renters so that I could just make it out in payments.
Governor Abbott.
I've always paid my property taxes on time. As a governor, I've ensured the state of Texas pays its bills on time. I balance a very conservative budget to make sure that we live within our means so that Texas will retain the high AAA rating that we have.
Sheriff, would you like to add anything?
I paid my taxes just like every other Texan. And a lot of us have to do it in payments. That's exactly what I did.
Thank you. And our next question goes to Norma Garcia.
Thank you, Julie. That is the end of the individual questions. The next set of questions will be addressed to both candidates. Earlier this month, new numbers came out from the U.S. Census. One striking statistic is that 4.8 million Texans do not have health insurance. And the Kaiser Foundation says that 2/3 of Texans believe the state is not doing enough to get people insured. Please state one thing you will do if elected that will help more Texans get health insurance. Governor.
First,
60 seconds.
Sure, Norma. Very importantly, we need to understand the success that we have had. Over the past 4 years, the uninsured rate among Texans has dropped 22%. The uninsured rate among Texas children has dropped 23%. A lot of people don't know, but Texas ranks the second best state in the nation for the reduction of child uninsured rate in the United States. So we're making great progress, but there's more we can do. It's one thing that I worked on, spent months on last year, about negotiating with the Federal Health and Human Services. This is bureaucratese. It's for what's called an 1115 waiver. This 1115 waiver made sure that through the Medicaid system, Texas was going to be providing greater access to Medicaid in the unique ways Texas needs. One problem with Medicaid across the board is it's a one-size-fits-all approach, and Texas doesn't fit the approach that may work for Kansas. By getting that waiver, I was able to craft an approach to ensure and cover more people in the state of Texas.
Thank you, Governor. Sheriff Valdez, 60 seconds.
1 in 6 Texans do not have health insurance. We're the highest uninsured state in the United States. Yet, Texas leads the attack on pre-existing conditions. By the way, a pre-existing condition is that you're female and can get pregnant. So now you're being singled out because you're female. We're leaving over $10 billion a year on the table by not accepting the Medicaid extension. Yes, he put in a system, and the system, there was no accountability, there was no measurement, and as you saw time and time in the media, it was profit over pain and all those things. You put your friends in an organization, they make a lot of money, and the vulnerable suffer. We need to accept the Medicaid expansion, and we need to invest in rural communities that have become a medical desert. Governor Abbott, will you stop your attack on pre-existing conditions?
You have 30 seconds to answer, Governor.
First, on pre-existing conditions, let me be very clear to the people of Texas. Under no circumstances will you lose coverage for pre-existing conditions, period. If the ACA is repealed, for one, Congress has already made clear, emphatically, that they will make sure pre-existing conditions are covered. Second, I, as governor, will work to make sure pre-existing conditions in Texas will be covered. Separate from that, with regard to Medicaid expansion, understand this, and that is, if Texas, can I answer? Were to expand Medicaid the way she's talking about, it would put Texas taxpayers on the hook for billions of dollars more every single year out of their pocketbooks.
It's just a certain percentage, and we're already paying that. It's called emergency hospital rooms. We're already doing that. So why don't we do it and accept over 1 million people on health care?
Governor, you have quickly 10 seconds for a rebuttal on that.
She wants to make a deal with the federal government that's $21 trillion in debt. That government will not be able to continue to match what they're doing right now. She's willing to write a blank check to the federal government that I will not write.
We are out of time.
Again.
We are out of time on that
Again.
question.
Norma, thank
Andy,
you.
you are next.
Thank you. We've got another question from Twitter tonight. This is from UFC Titan fans. He wants to know, what's your stance on marijuana legalization? Right now in Texas, only the sale of a specific cannabis oil for intractable epilepsy is legal. Sheriff Valdez, are you in favor of expanding the use of medical and recreational marijuana in Texas? You have 60 seconds.
I'm in favor of expanding medical marijuana. Alcohol has no medical benefits, yet it's taxed and fined. We know that medical marijuana has some health benefits. Why can't we tax and fine those also? And as far as recreational marijuana, I think it's up to the people. The people need to decide whether that's going to be in Texas or not. I think every other state has let the people decide. We should do the same thing. Let the people decide whether we should accept other than medical marijuana.
Governor Abbott, you have 60 seconds.
Parents with children who have epilepsy approached me a couple of sessions ago about the possibility of what's called CBD oil for their children. I was moved by what they had to say. I agreed with them, and I'm the governor who signed into law the legalization of CBD oil. More recently, I've had discussions with veterans as well as parents of autistic children and others who make a very strong, compelling case about legalization of medical marijuana. I have seen, however, in other states that authorize that, abuses take place that raise concerns. So I'm still not convinced yet. However, one thing I don't want to see is jails stockpiled with people who have possession of small amount of marijuana. What I would be open to talking to the legislature about would be reducing the penalty for possession of 2 ounces or less from a Class B misdemeanor to a Class C misdemeanor.
Sheriff Valdez, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
We agree on something. I believe in decriminalizing marijuana. And I honestly believe that often we have more in common than we have differences. And speaking of veterans, you know, I've heard plenty of doctors say they would much rather give the veterans, the mentally ill, others, marijuana than give them opioids, which are now legal. You can write a prescription for opioids and therefore have more problems with the people you prescribe that to than the medical marijuana.
Governor Abbott, 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Again, we want to make sure that if this is done, it's going to have controls on it so abuses don't take place. We need to observe what's going on in other states. I do agree that we need to take all steps possible to make sure that we reduce opioid abuse.
Thank you both for your answers. Steve Spriester has our next question.
Thank you, Andy. Speaking of things that you two agree on, when it comes to family separations, Governor Abbott, you said, quote, "This disgraceful condition must end and it can only end with action by Congress to reform the broken immigration system, end quote. Sheriff Valdez, you said, quote, where's our Texas heart? Governor Abbott, give me a specific solution that's not being implemented right now that you would like to see when it comes to immigration and the border. You have 60 seconds for your answer.
First, to be clear, and that is separating children from parents is always wrong. I was deeply disturbed when I heard about what was taking place, and I immediately called the United States Director for Homeland Security to inquire what was going on and what was being done to make sure it doesn't happen. And after multiple conversations, I was provided assurance that the separation of children from parents would end and would be a policy that would not happen again. In addition to that, however, I made clear both to the administration, but also most importantly to Congress, that if you look in the Constitution, this is Congress's authority only to fix a broken immigration system. And what we saw was a symptom of a far larger problem, and that is a broken immigration system. What Congress has to do is stop talking to cameras and start talking to each other in the Capitol building and start coming up with some solutions to our broken immigration system.
Thank you, Governor. Sheriff Valdez?
Obviously, we both agree that we have a broken immigration system. But what we don't agree on is the things that we do in Texas to stop some of that cruelty. Family separation was cruel, period. And it was first brought out as biblical, then we want to teach a lesson, then we want to do this. From the very beginning, it was cruel. Families should have never been separated. But there's a lot of things that we're doing that are causing fear-mongering also. The bathroom laws, the show me your papers law, all of these are nothing but fear-mongering that we sell as something else, but the truth is all we're doing is putting fear into communities. Show me your papers bill was one of the cruelest bills that has ever been signed. Law enforcement, schools, churches, businesses all came up and said this is a bad bill, but it was still passed. Time to stop the hate.
Thank you, Sheriff. Andy Sirota with the next question.
Steve, thank you. We've asked a lot of tough questions tonight, so we want to give voters a chance to get to know more about each of you on a personal level. You both came from different backgrounds, but your parents raised you as Texans. Can you share and describe a personal moment in your life where you felt Texas proud? Governor, you have 30 seconds.
Well, there are a lot of moments in my life when I felt Texas proud, whether it be when I was a kid growing up in Wichita Falls or playing Little League Baseball in Longview or playing high school football in Duncanville. But listen, I think speaking for all of us, there's no moment in Texas history that has made me more proud than to see the way our fellow Texans responded to Hurricane Harvey. That's what Texas is all about. These people on their own who got their own boats out to go rescue other people. It didn't matter who you were, what race you were. All that matters is you were a Texan, and a Texan was going to help you out.
Thank you, Governor. Sheriff Valdez, you have 30 seconds.
There's two things I want to bring out. First of all, he touched on one of them, is Texans helping Texans. We do this quite well. And nobody asks what party you belong to when they come to help. The other thing that made me so proud of being a Texan is that I came from the poorest zip code in San Antonio and a migrant worker, from crop fields to classroom to candidate. From the poorest zip code in San Antonio to be able to be the candidate for governor and the governor of Texas.
Sheriff Valdez.
One of the proudest Texas moments.
Thank you so much.
It's gone by quickly. Time now for closing statements. Sheriff Valdez, you are first and you have 60 seconds.
First of all, thank you so much to our hosts, to the audience, to Governor Abbott, and to the people behind the scenes and the LBJ Library. I'm running for governor because I want to give everyday Texans a fighting chance. I want to make sure that the government is fair, equal, and provides opportunity for all of us. As I mentioned, I came from the poorest zip code in San Antonio, 8th child of migrant workers, yet because of public education, I went on to college, the military, federal agent, sheriff. As sheriff of Dallas County, I was over 2,700 employees and over a budget of $160 million. I took on the good old boy system, and with common sense, compassion, and working with a lot of folks, we made that agency into a model department. Opportunity in Texas should be as big as the Texas sky, and I want to bring that to Texas. So I humbly ask for your vote.
60
God
seconds.
bless you. God bless Texas.
Thank you. Governor, you have 60 seconds.
We live in a state where anything is possible. A state where a young man's life can be broken in half and yet he can still rise up and become governor. In Texas, you can succeed no matter your circumstances. 4 years ago, I promised to make Texas even better. And since then, working together, we've elevated Texas to new heights. Texas is #1 in the nation for doing business and for job creation. Our schools are better. High school and college graduation rates are at all-time highs, and families are safer. We've arrested thousands of dangerous criminals and taken them off the streets. But I promise you this, if you re-elect me as governor, I will never stop fighting for you and your family. Together, we're going to keep Texas the premier state and the greatest nation in the history of the world.
Governor, Sheriff, thank you so much for being with us tonight. We want to thank the LBJ Foundation for being our host venue tonight. A special thank you to our candidates again, and KPRC, KSAT, KXAS, and Telemundo for helping us put this all together this evening. For our Nexstar Media Group stations, coverage continues right now with a special post-debate program and in-depth analysis. See how our focus group of undecided voters rated the candidates' answers tonight. Reminder, Election Day, Tuesday, November the 6th. Early voting opens up statewide October 22nd. Get out there and exercise your right to vote. Thank you for joining us, and good night from Austin.